Welcome to the Languages Pedagogy Podcast. Thank you very much for connecting in another episode here. Today we have another wonderful guest that I've actually been having a quite a long conversation trying to get to the right point. We can just meet, try to get the schedules working over there due to the time zones and everything. But finally we made it. We are here now with Andrea Bitner. Thank you very much for being here. I would like you to introduce yourself and let the audience know who you are and what you do.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. So, hey, everybody. My name is Andrea Bitner. I'm a proud English language learner, educator, author, and speaker based out of Philadelphia, PA. And yes, to your point, we have finally gotten the chance to get together today. So, I'm excited about our conversation. I've been teaching in education now for 26 years, worked as a high school English teacher, an English language learner teacher, and a Title I reading specialist. So worked in literally every grade along the way and still currently teaching today.
That's a lot of experience over there. I'm really glad actually I got to actually have you here on the show because I really believe that this corner must be for educators so we can actually just spread positivity and spread like all the good things that we actually do and all the things that we would like to actually change, implement in the classroom for better students, better learners, better kids, better future, I would say. So, Andrea, why don't we just start with something real right now? I would like to start
All right.
like with something really uh that some ideas that I actually had in my mind before actually having this conversation. Why do you think so many English learners are still stuck in what we could call survival mode in today's classroom?
One of the things I think that causes an English learner to be stuck is lack of engagement and sometimes a lack of training on the content area teacher's part in how to provide what I call the ramps or the supports that students need to reach success with any given assignment. And I always say, that is through no fault of anyone's. When I started teaching 26 years ago, I was never trained in how to work with an English language learner. I didn't have that background knowledge. I call it that lens shift of, what to do, what resources to pull, who to ask, what questions to wonder about, what, family information to gather. So I think that the combination of a teacher who may not feel confident in how to support an English language in the classroom, not have the resources, the tools, the communication tools,
Yeah.
etc., and students who, on the flip side, who are not feeling engaged with what they're learning in class, will result in a student who is challenged in school.
Exactly. That's one of the biggest challenges actually that we have. And let's keep in mind that back in the days, we were not actually talking about multilingualism, right? This is another aspect that it was not actually, but we were not talking about it. I didn't actually hear anything about it, but now we're talking about bilingualism and multilingualism. So,
Yes, we really are. And most of the multilingual learners I know, at least here in the US, are born here, right? So they're, home with mom for the first few years
yeah.
of life or someone in the family. They may have gone to preschool, they may not have gone to preschool. So education in kindergarten may be their first time,
Yeah.
becoming a multilingual learner.
And when you go into this classroom, what are the first signs that tells you the environment is helping multilingual learners thrive or just helping them get by?
We talk about a lot about the idea of what we call language rich classroom. And that basis for me is actually built on a book that I studied years ago by William and Persida Hemley, called The Language Rich Classroom, or Classroom
Mhm.
Instruction That Works. And so when you go into those classrooms, you see representation, of a diverse cultures, diverse backgrounds with photos and pictures and illustrations and quotes and classroom libraries that are built in a diverse way. You see students that are engaged with each other, whether it be in conversation or collaboration or group work, opportunities for the teacher to what we do that model of, you know, I do, we do, you do. So I'm going to show you, you're going to practice with that low anxiety environment with a group or with friends, application, then you're going to do it on your own, right? We see that practice of a cycle over and over. We see, kids engaging with other kids in social conversation. We see rapport and relationships where that you see that teacher and those students engaging with each other, supporting each other, knowing it's okay to make mistakes, celebrating the small wins along the way, having, I've seen classrooms where, and we did this in mine too, where we had pictures of every student on a small poster, and throughout the year it became their individual compliment boards.
Mm-hmm.
And so all through the year, students could write something kind to each other on that board. A teacher or a visitor could come in and add to that board. The teacher could add something to that board. The student could write something they were proud of from that day. And at the end of the year, they walk away with this mini poster of themselves with all of the accomplishments, all of the things. That doesn't mean there were never any mistakes throughout the year, right? But there are always
Exactly.
setbacks, especially with your toughest kids. You have to expect that. But what an opportunity, right? To see connection, collaboration, conversation. These are the things that I see, in addition to the scaffolding a teacher's providing academically to support students.
Well, now you mentioned one word, mistakes. How do you see them? I
Mm.
mean, because in one of the past episodes, I was actually talking to another wonderful teacher, and well, I've actually had these type of teachers who are actually very straightforward about mistakes, and other ones not so straightforward in mistakes. They don't even like some of them. They don't even like to call them mistakes. What is your perspective on mistakes? The word mistakes in students.
For me, if you pick that word apart, it's a mistake. It's just an opportunity to say my brain is growing,
Hmm.
my brain is learning. Physically, biologically, my synapses are reforming. I thought it was
True.
supposed to go this way. No, the answer is supposed to go that way. And I think that growth mindset for students, that idea of a not yet,
Hmm.
we use that all the time. And by the way, it doesn't just apply to elementary students. Secondary students need those too. And so I
Especially those
see
ones, I would
as
say.
especially, and so I see mistakes as successes. No one learns through just being successful all the time.
That's
You
true.
always learn from your failures. You learn the most from your failures. And what I really value, and a friend of mine, Principal L here in the United States, is he always says, we don't need to teach kids how to respond when they do well. We need to teach kids how to respond when they fail. And that response to failure. And so I see mistakes as opportunities. I see them as learning paths. I look at them as what I call no's. And when I at least pick apart that word no, it just means next opportunity. And
True.
so if you teach that to students, you'll provide them with the stamina they need to continue to fail. Just fail forward. That's what I tell my
True.
kids. Fail forward.
That's beautiful. Yeah, exactly. That's also I think exactly the same. And for sure, many of our teachers in the audience who would agree with you as well. I ask you that one because it's really sensitive, that part about talking about mistakes, because not all the teachers are prepared to respond positively to help students in this area of mistakes. If one of the students just make a mistake, maybe one of them will be like, "Hey, you made a mistake. No, that's it. Zero. Goodbye. Fail." But some other ones are like, "No, no, no. This is the way. Let's do it." So this is a reality. I don't know if actually happening it's happening in your community or in your circle there in Philadelphia, you told me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Is it happening there? Or how do you see the teachers in that community, for example, in terms of mistakes? Do you think they are pretty well prepared to that or something like it?
Absolutely. Mistakes are information as an educator. If you have a small group of students that are continuing to demonstrate, right, that they haven't mastered material, whether it's socially, emotionally, academically, whatever your expectation is,
Hmm.
they're not meeting it, then I think that's an opportunity for you as the educator to say, okay, why? Why are they not meeting it? Is it that they are struggling academically and they need additional support? They need additional curriculum. They need a different environment, right? In order to practice these skills, do they need more time? Is it, the whole class is demonstrating
Hmm.
to me that they're not understanding a concept? Then if it's that scenario, I'm looking back at my teaching to say, okay, what do I need to change in my approach to how I may be
Exactly.
teaching this? Do they need more modeling? Do they need more practice? Again, is the environment conducive to them showing what they know? Or is it they need, what we would call like a tier 3 intervention, more intensive support with an additional educator outside of the curriculum during the school week? Where does that support fall? And, so I see when students are not meeting an expectation, I see that as an opportunity to gather information.
Exactly. Keeping that part of the mistakes there, I got so many questions for you because so many things come to my mind to my mind this moment. But having in mind these mistakes here, I know you're also a teacher trainer, right?
Yes, I work with teachers in addition to teaching in the
Mm,
classroom. Yes.
awesome. So you got the consultancy and all that. So when you are actually working with the teachers, uh, from that experience, what do you hear from the teachers about the misunderstandings about multilingual learners?
The first, let's say, call them myths and misconceptions, right? And the
Mm.
first myth or misconception that I see most often is that lack of language equals lack of intelligence. And that is just simply never the case. If you, brought me to China, where I have students right now in here in the US who are from China, and you brought me there and you asked me to immediately speak Mandarin and immediately, use it in several situations throughout, the day, I would not look very intelligent. And I would be very limited in my opportunity and my ability to do the things there right away that I do here. And
Exactly.
so I always, caution people to know that a student may not know the word for something, but that doesn't mean they never learn the concept. And so we really have to strive to know that that's one of the myths. I think that the second myth or misconception I talk to teachers about is that not every family prefers their first language for school communication. And what I mean by that is we have 31 different languages represented in my district.
Wow.
We are very intentional about finding out in the beginning of the year what language your family prefers to communicate in. Some of them prefer English, some of
Hmm.
them prefer Arabic, some of them prefer both. And so it's important to have that conversation with families. And we do it via a Google translatable email that says, "Hi, I've noticed that your student is identified as a multilingual learner in our system. Thank you so much for giving them that gift. I think that is fantastic. We
Oh,
would love to know, how would you prefer school communication to come home this year?" Google form,
beautiful.
that's it. Click the button. And people do. And then it's like, okay, now I've got a list. And I can give that to the content area teachers, to the leadership in the building. This is what language our parents will prefer to communicate
Yes.
in for conferences, for weekly newsletters, for school closures, communications, testing, etc. So I think that those two, the lack of language never equals lack of intelligence, and finding out what family preference your families will want to communicate in, are two that I experience the most.
Yeah, I can imagine actually how they feel, when they're asked, what language would you prefer actually to use? English or your mother tongue or whatever. I mean, it must be feeling like really good because not everybody actually has that access. And right now that we have AI, I think that can be even a little bit easier. AI can help a lot in that sense.
Absolutely. We use a quick website called Talking Points that
Hmm?
is free for educators. It's web based. You put in the student's name, you put in the parent phone number, you put in the language they prefer. You send the message home in whatever language, like here we would
Wow.
send it home in English, but it gets communicated into the language the parent prefers.
Wow.
They respond to me in Mandarin, and it comes back to me in English. I get an email that says, "You have an email
Beautiful.
from Dongjung's mom." And I say,
Wow.
"Great." And it's documentation as well for conversation. We have teachers
Exactly.
that use Class Dojo for that, same platform, to have
Yeah.
daily communication with
Yeah.
parents. AI is changing every day, I feel like. There's an app called Maestra that's great that I've, learned about. I've learned about every week. I feel like I'm learning about a different opportunity for communication purposes.
True.
So I would encourage people to spend the time looking because
Using
there are a
it.
lot of, yes, use it. Your parents will engage with you, and ultimately they're the root of all
Yeah,
information. So that's what we want.
exactly. Exactly. Actually, really, really glad you brought also this little part about the websites and all that, because that actually increases the interaction, especially with the teachers who are working online. That helps a lot. That helps a lot.
It really does. I mean, if you think about it, I was just having this conversation with someone the other day. I started teaching 26 years ago. Engaging with families looks a lot more different in terms of live time than it did when I started. Back in, I want to say back in the day,
Definitely.
but back in the day, it was like, they came to conferences, they got their weekly newsletter, right? A hard copy went home into the event coming up. Now, we FaceTime parents midday with great news. We have
Yes.
live class dojo where people are seeing that their student got a positive remark or point. We have quick YouTube videos we can create. We have live streaming. I mean, there's so many things now that you can do. We have talking point messages to engage with
Yeah.
parents, and it goes right to their phone. And most people have their phone nearby part of the day. So it's immediate. And so those responses, we send pictures to families when we're on class trips 5 minutes after we took them, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh
Wow.
wow, there's my son. He's having a great time. My daughter's loving it.
Yes.
So I just feel like, yes, engagement is at an all-time high, and I think people should take advantage of it.
Capture life's precious moments in stunning details with our professional cameras. Unleash your creativity and preserve memories like never before. Visit us now at frameflowcn.com.
Definitely. So now that we have all these advantages and a whole thing actually going on right now in the system, if we have to redefine what success look like for an English learner, what would that definition be?
As an EL teacher, we're working in 4 areas. We're working with reading, we're working with writing, we're working with listening, and we're working with speaking. And I have students who have come into the classroom who are amazing readers and writers. And then I ask those same students to go down the hall and have a conversation with the office team, and they are a deer in headlights.
Mhm.
Then I've got the opposite. I've got students who will talk all day long. They will sound like native speakers. Their teachers will say, I can't believe they're in the multilingual learner program. They don't need that
Yeah.
help. And then I put a piece of literacy in front of that same student, and they can't decode, or
Wow.
they're not sure about how to comprehend literally or inferentially or respond to after reading. And so a successful English learner to me looks like someone who has been given the proper assessments to determine where their areas of need are, because then
Exactly.
I'll add, that we have SLIFE students, limited interrupted formal education, who are working on all four. You are, learning to read at the middle school level. And so when they come in, that proper screening is number one. A successful student would look like they've been properly screened. Number two, you have a content area teacher who's delivering accommodations in the classroom based on those assessments and working with the multilingual learner teacher to provide those ramps to success. And number three, you would see them growing over time and remembering it takes time.
Exactly.
We're in it in this world for the long game, and so depending on how strong those students are in their roots of their first language, that will let me know how quickly they'll acquire their second. And
Yes.
so, those timing of the years, of 3 to 5 years to get the social language, 5 to 7 to 10 years to get the academic language. Just as an educator, remember who you see, I call it when we hire, will not be who we see when they retire.
If they retire.
When we
Yes.
see them, longer on in their schooling, you will see a
Of
different
course.
student and know you played a role in it.
Definitely. Oh, that sounds really, I like it. I like how you put it. I need to actually just get all what you just said and put them in a quote. Just gonna post it there. Sounds really beautiful. So
Sure.
now, but moving on a little bit to the teachers part. So let's be honest here, because teachers are overwhelmed right now. How
Yeah.
can they move beyond survival mode themselves while trying to support the students? Because right now it's
I,
actually really, really tough time actually for teachers.
it is all around the world. It absolutely is. And burnout is at an all-time high. And
Yes.
we can't find the replacements. We're working on it, right? But they're coming. But yes, I
Hopefully.
think that the first thing that I learned, not early on in my career, but later in my career, because 22 now out of my 26 years I've spent as a support teacher. And so I get to work with teachers all day, every day, switching groups every 40, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, seeing different grade levels, different classrooms. And our teachers are tired. You're right. And I think that the one thing that I had to learn, and I hope that I present this to my teachers too, is that no one achieves success alone. You have to really lean into your, school community, the people, your grade level partners or teachers in other grade levels that you feel you can connect with, leaning into your leadership, constant communication about what your needs might be personally, professionally,
Mhm.
as you travel through the own chapters, of your own lives. Bursting your bubble is helpful to me. And what I mean by that is getting onto some professional groups free, like LinkedIn, Facebook professional groups, Twitter, X or whatever they're calling it now,
Mhm.
leaning into the resources and the challenges and the conversations and the free PDs that are out there for you to continue to stay connected, not
Yeah.
feel so solo. You can be professional and post a challenge you're having and have ideas in an instant. You
Mhm.
can have resources almost, within a day. Teachers love teachers. Teachers, want to help other
Yes.
teachers. And so there's a much bigger community out there. And even if you're not big into the tech world, I encourage leaders, if they're listening, to let your teachers connect with other local teachers.
Mhm.
Let them get together for a half day PD, share their challenges, have conversations. That's why I say that we never get off our block. You're always in your, technologically, if you're teaching virtually, you're in your office. If you're in a building, you're, with your same teachers every day, being intentional about having connections from building to building, or,
Yes.
quick monthly Zoom calls where teachers can hop on from different districts here in the US. We call them districts, and let them get together. So really, I see that
That
as
sounds really beautiful.
the way to do that.
That sounds beautiful. But the thing is that let's go to another side because I don't want to actually sound like everything's negative here, but it's actually beautiful to put them into words. But the point is the actions because we know actually not all the districts or not all the administrators or the principals in the schools allow these type of things to happen.
Sure.
So what would be actually the message to them? Because I don't know actually how can we make them realize that we're also human. We also need something.
Yeah. I don't have like a magic potion answer for that. I wish I did, because, the leaders set the culture of a building. They
All right,
ask.
let's talk about the work of one truly amazing educator. Well, it's the exact question Andrea Bitner has spent her whole career trying to answer. Yep, 24 years. Right on the front lines of public education. She's taught K through 12 students from literally all over the world. And in her incredible books, she makes sure those students' voices are heard. Plus, she shares everything she's learned with educators all across the country. So, what's her secret sauce? It all starts by really listening to the students. And that idea is right at the heart of her first book, Take Me Home. It shares the real, powerful stories of 11 English language learners. Her next book, When Niagara Falls, is all about helping everyone feel like they belong. But, it's not just about the students. It's about empowering teachers, too. Her training actually breaks it down into 3 simple steps for teachers to follow. And her work has practical tools for, well, everyone in the school system. Yeah, she really covers it all, from student resilience to guiding school leaders. She's even a key voice in other big projects, like the book Culture First Classrooms. So, what's all this dedication led to? You guessed it, huge national recognition. I mean, her impact is everywhere, from state awards right up to national stages. It's just an amazing journey that shows what one teacher can do, which really makes you think, how can one story light up a whole community?
They absolutely do. I can tell from the moment I walk into a building what the culture is like in that building, from the main office staff to the way the halls are represented to the teachers and their their body language as you walk through the building. Are they calm? Are they content? Are they happy? Are they frustrated? How's that work? I think that communicating, over communicating as much as you can with leadership when you see that there's a challenge in the building is something that's important, because where there is a void in communication, negativity will fill it. And I think that it's important to have transparency, with the leadership in the building. If you are a teacher who doesn't feel comfortable with the leadership in the building, there are a lot of teacher leaders in your building who may want to take on those types of conversations. So, I think it's important to lean into your school community with people that you feel comfortable communicating with when you're feeling that negativity or that lack of communication. And if it gets to a point where it's affecting you personally, professionally, in terms of life balance, then I think that you might have to look for a different building. And I don't think that there are so many ways in education to serve. And I've learned that over time myself. Being in a classroom, I absolutely love it like you do. And I think that that's a good fit for me, in addition to teaching at the college and other things I get to do. But I've also learned along the way that there are lots of ways in education to serve as an educator. And it doesn't just have to be in a classroom every single day. Now, I'm not encouraging people to hop out and leave right now.
No.
But I am saying to do your due diligence in trying to communicate to have your needs met as a school entity, and then always make the best decision for you.
Exactly. Well, you said it, and that's the way, also comes on other things actually to my mind, because you were mentioning the teachers. We got different type of teachers, and we got actually help one another and all that. Talking a little bit about moving on a little bit to the strategies part in the classroom. If a teacher listening right now wants to improve tomorrow's lesson, what are 2 or 3 immediate strategies they can apply to better support English learners, for example?
I think the first thing you need to do is make sure you know who your multilingual teacher is in the building, and ask them for the screening information to find out where your students' strengths and areas of needs are. Because, for example, if they are a student that would, like I was mentioning before, that it needs support in listening and speaking, then look for the pieces of your lesson where you might have to provide modeling. You might have to provide sentence frames. You might have to provide a buddy for them to practice with first. You might have to provide an index card with the key 5 words in a word bank that you want them to use in their conversation, right? Where is the need? Because you don't have to redesign every second of every lesson for the entire day for your multilingual learner. But you do need to be able to be aware of where their needs are first, to pick out the pieces of the lesson where they will need the ramp. That's how I explain it. I think the second piece to be aware of is, what are your students' goals? If you wanted to turn around tomorrow, if you're working especially with, secondary students at that middle and high school level, what are their life goals? Have you had a conversation with them to find out?
Exactly.
And where are the communication tools in your school in order to have those longer conversations with students in a one-on-one setting to find out? So, for example, in my building, we use language-based services. It's a language service with 163 live translators available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's an 800 number. I call and I tell what language I need. Within 2 minutes, I've got a live interpreter on the phone, right? And it's sitting with that student and then having that conversation, building that rapport with your student so that they feel that they can share with you what their goals are, or what mistakes they might be worried about, or more information from home. So I would say accessing the ML teacher, finding out those areas of need to tweak your lessons, that teacher will help you with that.
Exactly.
And accessing your student, making sure you're building a rapport with them.
Again, we have a pattern here. Communication is everything. We were talking about communication with teachers. Now we're talking about communication with the students as well. I mean, we gotta have that type of a empathetic, or this good way to communicate with the students, to get to know them a little bit more. If we don't get to know them, how are we planning to help them, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've spent most of my career, and I still do today, working with some of the most at-risk, toughest kids in the building. And I will say this until probably the day I retire, which is, Kids do not care about what you know until they know that you care.
Exactly.
They don't. They absolutely don't. And I have example and story after story of some of the toughest kids who I've watched, engage with teachers along the way through their entire careers, and the ones that they felt cared. Now, I'm not saying you're going to absolutely fall in love with every kid that walks in your door, but you better become a good actor. They better
Well,
think
it's
that you
true.
do. They better think that you do,
Mhm.
because if not, they're not going to perform for you.
As a matter of fact, yeah, as an educator, as educators, we have to actually know how to deal with it. We gotta have a really big soul full of energy, positive energy, and try
Yeah,
to accept, tolerate, accept in a positive way, move in a right way, so we can actually just keep teaching kids, make them feel valued. I think that's also important here. If they don't
it
feel
is.
value,
I would say that kids and families and even your colleagues, in my experience, are always looking for three things. They're looking to feel respected, they're looking to feel accepted, and they're looking to feel admired. And if you can provide that type of environment for them, even when they make those mistakes, they will work for you. They will work for you. And that's been my experience in things that I employ.
beautiful. Exactly. That's what I actually think as well. So moving a little bit also to this other part of equity. We talk a lot about equity in education, right? Every time. But what does equity actually look like in practice for multilingual learners?
For me, it looks like giving them what they need in order to succeed. And when we talk about equity, I'll stick with my example of the secondary students. We have students who have a lot of outside responsibilities outside of school,
Hmm.
and they're not able to be what we would call that traditional successful student. And so we've had to get really creative with supplying them with the content and the requirements they need to meet, but still adhering and respecting the responsibilities that aren't going to go away from outside of school. So, for example, we have a student who works 4 days a week, and he works from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. every night at a local restaurant. He's responsible for providing funding for his family. I
Hmm.
know that that student is going to need a different scheduling plan in terms of life, because he is not going to be able to meet the regular school expectations. So we got creative. We provided him with some online courses. We provided him with some work study credit. We provided him with a study hall during the day to give him an opportunity to get his work done and only be responsible for the minimum core classes that he needs to take in grade 9, because he's only in ninth grade, in
Yeah.
which is 14 years old, in order to make it through this freshman year.
That's
Now, will we
reality.
tweak that and change that and adjust that over time? Yes. Do we have communication with the family in terms of, is there opportunity there to maybe go to 3 days a week, right? As he grows, what are his post-secondary goals, etc.? He wants to be a
Sure.
carpenter. Fantastic, right? But we can't ignore the outside responsibilities. So for him, that is equitable practice in my mind.
Exactly.